The question is that grievance has been noted, and I call the honourable member for Hughes.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Tonight I'd like to speak on the ACCC's recent electricity pricing inquiry. Specifically, I'd like to offer my support for the ACCC's recommendation number 24, which is that the Small-scale Renewable Energy Scheme be abolished by 2021. And the ACCC say, and I quote directly from their report, in light of the dramatic reduction in solar PV installation costs, the ACCC considers the case for the subsidy for small-scale installation is now weak, and it is the view that the SRES should be ended earlier than its current scheduled date in 2030. Deputy Speaker, this year there is actually subsidies under this scheme of $1.2 billion. And the way that scheme actually works, that $1.2 billion actually gets added on to everyone's electricity bill. So when we get our bill from one of the retailers, that is smeared across everyone's bill. So if we are serious, and we've heard talk across the chamber, across the parliament over the last 2 days here since we returned back from the winter recess, everyone talking about lowering electricity prices. Well, here's a way that we can knock at least $1 billion off. As I said, this year it's cost $1.2 billion. We could knock that off and bring electricity prices down if we accept this recommendation. Now, the only reason for not accepting it is to listen to noisy green rent seekers who want the subsidy to continue. Now, to explain how the subsidy works, if someone is actually installing rooftop solar panels on their roof, they get a rebate of $40 for every megawatt hour their rooftop installation will generate, or estimated to be generated, out to the year 2030. Now, a few calculations are from a group called Solar Choice. They say, and I'll give the example in New South Wales, because where your solar panels are located in Australia depends on the actual generation that you get. So New South Wales, you will generate more electricity from your solar panels than you would in Victoria, and again than what you would in Tasmania. So in New South Wales, a 5 kilowatt installation would cost you $8,600, but you would get a subsidy of $3,340. Now, many people don't even know they're getting that subsidy because it's written in the contract that the installer gets it. So they would pay $5,200.60 out of their pocket, but they would get that $3,340 simply gets added on to everyone else's electricity bills. And in fact, even large industrial premises can take advantage of this scheme. You can actually, under this scheme, install up to 100 kilowatts, which is something around 400 solar panels. And for that, Deputy Speaker, even though the all-up cost that you may pay out of your pocket is $113,000, but the rebate that you get, the cost to everyone else that uses electricity, is $68,260. They're the estimates of the costs from New South Wales. Now, what has the Grattan Institute said about the solar scheme? And I quote directly, this is the Grattan Institute. In 2005, they drew attention to why this scheme, and I will quote directly from their report titled Sundown, Sunrise by Tony Wood and David Blowers. And they said, and I'll quote, lavish government subsidies plus the structure of the electricity network tariff means that the cost of solar PV take-up outweighed the benefits by almost $10 billion. Just stop there. $10 billion wasted. And they go on. By the time the subsidies are finally run out, households and businesses that have not installed solar PV will have spent more than $14 billion subsidising households that have. So this is also simply a reverse Robin Hood scheme. Those renting, those living in apartments, are subsidising those that are able to afford to install solar on their roof at the cost of a $14 billion wealth transfer. And they conclude, Australia could have reduced emissions for much less money. Governments have created a policy mess that should never be repeated. And also, Deputy Speaker, not only is it adding costs to electricity, it is also completely economically inefficient, and in fact in little more than a Ponzi scheme. Now, if we look at what the levelised cost of energy from a rooftop solar scheme, we have the Australian Energy Council solar report from January 2018, and they give a levelised cost of energy for different discount rates and for different cities and for different size installations. Now, I'll give the example again. In Sydney, for a 5 kilowatt solar installation, they say the cost after the subsidies is $120 a megawatt hour. So if we put the subsidy back in, we are getting a generation cost of $180 a megawatt hour to generate that electricity. So what we are actually doing, we are turning down our coal generators that have a marginal cost of around $35 and subsidising something that costs $180 a megawatt hour. Now imagine if you were running a factory and you had a factory producing goods for $35 a unit, and you decided to close that factory down and you're going to open another factory to produce that same good for $180. That would be clear economic insanity. But, Deputy Speaker, this is exactly what this scheme does. And it's the same if we look at it again for a large industrial installation. And if we look at something where, again, the 100 kilowatts in Sydney, again for a factory, $120 a megawatt hour with the subsidy already taken out. We put that subsidy back in, and again we are north of $180 a megawatt hour. Now, while that may make sense for that particular building or that particular household, the only reason is, as the Grattan Institute point out, is that the cost of the transmission lines is actually not costed economically. And I know, again, quote from the Grattan Institute, they say, a second subsidy associated with solar PV is related to how electricity is priced. Since, it goes here, solar households, since they consume less electricity overall, they pay less than other households do to use the network. However, solar households on average place as much strain on the distribution network as those without solar do. So when you put those costs in, Deputy Speaker, the economic inefficiency of this scheme also calls for it to be stopped. Now, I have also heard some talk that Australia has this great competitive advantage. We are the sunburnt country. But, Deputy Speaker, when you look at our coastal regions in Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide and even Brisbane, when you look at where these coastal areas are being installed, the solar PV output from those solar panels are no greater than many other places in the world. Now, just some numbers, for example, the solar PV output from a 1 kilowatt of solar panels, Sydney 1,397, Melbourne 1,295. Now, if we compare that with places like Egypt that are rolling out one of the largest coal-fired power stations in the world, in Cairo it's 1,802, in Aswan it's 1,926. So on average, they're generating more than 29% more electricity, more electricity from a solar panel, 29% more than in Sydney and 39% more in Melbourne. Australia, it's the same, similar in India, Deputy Speaker, where again, in India you would be able to generate more electricity in many major cities than you would in Australia. So we have no competitive advantage. I call on all members of Parliament, let's work on this together. Let's not try and score points off each other about protecting renewables or something. We can save Australian consumers. And the worst off consumers, Deputy Speaker, those hardest up, we can save them $1.2 billion if we could get together and we could both adopt the ACCC recommendation, which I commend it to the House.